on Art in the Renaissance. I don't know if that's posed a problem. It's basically the same text with some updating, so I'll try to look later today and see if there's a discrepancy in page numbers and things that I've given you. Roughly, it's the same text, and what I'm after with Welch is the context, particularly the historical context, and she's very good on the domestic setting, which is the big last section in both volumes, both editions. And she's also quite good, I think, on the political context. She's written about Milan and the Sforza in Milan, so she's particularly oriented to that kind of contextualism. So that's what I'm after with Welch. Today we also have a document, and I want to talk a little bit more about how can you use the material in the readers on exams, because it often takes a class a whole semester to take me seriously about it. And so I urge you, as we go along, to figure out, as we look at various documents and various materials, how you might take an idea. It's the idea I'm after. An idea from the documents, hearing the voice at the time, or a critical analysis that we have several of. How would you use those? What kind of an idea could you come away from that if you got an image that you could connect that reading with or that source with, how could you indicate that you know about that? You can say, as in the reader, but you need an idea. And so what you need is just a single idea at this point, something that indicates that you've actually read things, that you've thought about them, and that you can apply them to the imagery. I don't want just memorization and regurgitation, as we used to say. I'm interested in you using the images that I've asked you to know as markers for broader issues, broader questions. And sometimes it deals with an artist's style change, and so that poses some other issues. But hopefully you'll see today a little bit more of what I mean. Okay, so we're looking at the same group of sculptors, in a sense, who competed for the Baptistry door competition. Ghiberti was involved. Donatello was not, as far as we know, but we saw Donatello last time emerging on the Orson Michele programs of representations of guild saints, the most innovative of the whole group. A third artist who we know for sure was in competition for the Baptistry doors, but whose panel we don't have, is a man named Jacopo della Quercia, or Jacob of the Oak Tree. And I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about him today, because he is a very important figure. He does some very innovative things. Not everything is, but a lot of what he does is quite constructive to what will emerge as a kind of new figural representation. And he works locally, but he also works especially in the region. So in nearby Siena, nearby Lucca, both in the Tuscan area that Florence is a part of, then across the Apennines in Bologna. And I have added later, you don't need to know it, Ferrara, which we'll visit later. It's a very important area, and he does a more conservative kind of image there for the local cathedral. Remember, for today, we have a series of things I've asked you to know in Siena, and in Lucca, and in Bologna. You'll notice that Ferrara is not listed here, and as I say, you won't be responsible for that. We're going to be dealing with projects that are both communal and private, and this is where Welch is very good, talking about the communities that are the patrons. And she has some sections here on Rome and the republics, and the Tuscan republics, which I'm particularly interested in. We're going to have an original source from Chambers. Chambers publishes a lot of different documents, and they're kind of complicated. He's the third one, and then there are a series of subdivisions on those. And I've listed them with titles when I can. This one is a letter from Jacopo della Quercia to the officials that had hired him to do a project. And it is, in fact, the Church of San Petronio, and Welch talks about that too. Bologna is a very interesting city. It's a place where there are very early law courts and a law school. It's a center for the Dominican order, but the Franciscans are represented there too. And its church that everybody knows is San Petronio, and it is not the cathedral. The cathedral is down the street. You have to go hunting for it. So it's unlike Siena, unlike Florence, where the cathedral is the dominant church. In the case of Bologna, it's San Petronio. So we'll look at what Jacopo does there, at what Jacopo does in Lucca. That one is a private commission. And that is of a woman, a kind of topic that Welch will treat more fully. And she has some interesting comparative material that we'll come to later in the class. So we've got a range of things here in various places. Sculpture is still our medium, and you can do some looking there at John Pope Hennessy from his volume on Italian Gothic sculpture. I haven't included nearly the extensive coverage there that I could. Pope Hennessy is on reserve for you in the library if you want to go scouting around a bit for yourself. And the Hart Wilkins background for this material is listed as well. Let me show you an interesting example of the kind of civic responsibility that we're going to start with in Siena. But one of the earlier, better examples to show you by comparison is what the town and the area of Perugia designs for its citizens. And it's an early example of what Siena will do, and we'll come back to Siena. Perugia is just south of Tuscany. There's Tuscany over there. You can see that rather red-orange blurb in the top let's see if my pointer works better today. Over here, you can see it, where it fits in the sort of center of Italy. And I want to speak just briefly to you about Perugia, because all these cities, which are walled, which is on top of the hills for defensive purposes, have these long legacies. And Perugia is one of the oldest. Remember that the core of Florence is celebrated by being an ancient Roman castrum, a military outpost. But Perugia, in a sense, has them beat, because Perugia was a center for the Etruscans. It's only one of many cultures of the Etruscan civilization that spread through this whole area. But in the case of Perugia, they celebrate particularly the Etruscan culture with this ancient gate from an ancient Perusian wall. And so the cities celebrate their heritage in a whole variety of ways, often preserving various monuments. But in the case of the point of purpose in visiting here this morning is that you've got, in this case, the Palace of Priors. Wherever it is the government is seated, these things are called different things. In Florence, the Palazzo Vecchio or the Palazzo della Signoria. In Siena, it's the Palazzo Pubblico or the public palace. Here, it's specifically the Palace of the Priors. And so you've got a big government building here. The cathedral is off where you're all sitting. And in the center here is a very large, elaborate fountain. And I cite this because this is an example of these communities being concerned about providing fresh water for their citizenry. And if you're following what's happening again in Syria, you'll notice that the absence of fresh water is one of the very basics of people's existence. And usually these are very carefully constructed from an engineering point of view, and they don't usually allow animals to drink from these. It's for human consumption, and there's a designation of what kind of fountains you can use for what. Let me just show you briefly that these fountains are also the opportunity for a community to celebrate various heroes, historical heroes, actual heroes, allegories of virtues, religious beliefs. and that is the case here. It's also a chance to demonstrate the kind of arts that are being developed, and at this point we've got a design by a leading artist, Nicola Pisano, together with his son, and in the very top of it, a series of 3 figures in bronze, and this was right at the time when bronze was kind of being redeveloped again here in central Italy, and so they're bragging by putting it on the very top of their fountain. There's some wonderful innovative sculpture here, both in the source for the water supply or in these elegant, marvelous figures that we think were designed here for this, in fact, maybe by Arnolfo di Cambio. Well, I show you that as a prototype that what we're going to see in Siena is not unique, but it is a very good example of Siena providing the same thing. A decision made by the priors in 1406 and for their city. Now remember, Siena is to the west of Florence, to the west and the south. I must say, I think everything's cold this morning. So much mechanical devices. All right, you see where Siena is here, to the south and west of Florence, and it's up in the hills of the Chianti region. It's really very rough kind of territory around here, and the town is built on several hills in a very irregular kind of way. The cathedral is, of course, dominant, but so too are their city gates, and here again you have the various gates at various quarters and various directions of the city. This happens to be the one on the south side towards Rome, the Roman gate, and you see in various imagery of the city, often the major monuments will be depicted. The walls, all of the importation of goods that they were so proud of, or here in their account books, a view of the city and their cathedral in this dark gray stone, gray to black and white. And invariably these cities are protected not only by various heroes, but religious figures, and in the case of Siena, the belief that the Virgin Mary is their protectress. The ecclesiastical center is not the only one. It is up on the highest hill, and it's the most visible, but a second very prominent building is their political center. So in this case, called the Palazzo Pubblico, or the public palace, and the area in front, which is sometimes jokingly called the skirt of the Virgin. The Virgin is the protectress of the city, and it's a great kind of fan-shaped open space. And you'll notice here it's got a very high bell tower. After all, communication couldn't do by telephone and internet, but you had to ring bells to warn people and tell the time and a whole variety of things. And you can see that the piazza slopes down a bit. It's up still quite high. And what we're going to talk about is a fountain that the city fathers then erect here in the center, well, not in the center of the piazza, but in this political location in direct connection with the political edifice in front of it. And let me just remind you that it's inside here that in the previous century there are these elaborate frescoes describing what good government is about in these communes. They're really quite fascinating, and they've been beautifully analyzed by a number of political theorists who have parsed all this quite well. Allegories of the good government figure itself, in this male bearded figure, the effects of good government on this side, where we really have a chance to see the city functioning in a whole range of ways. The countryside is just beyond it, and bad governments on the other side. Badly damaged fresco, by the way. So we've got a world here where certain civic ideas are preserved and celebrated. Here's justice over here, and good government is flanked by all kinds of virtues, with the citizens, all male notice, making their way from concord over to good government. And you may notice that there's an allegory right here at the foot of good government that we're going to see on our fountain. In other words, the fountains, once again, are an opportunity to provide really a needed necessity for the community, but also